that loiter in the vicinity using other capabilities. They gather this information, and then they're able to build a strike package, not just about the target, but what's protecting the target, where the radar envelopes are, where terrain combines with a gap in coverage to create the potential for a drone to navigate its way through without being detected. And remember, because the Russians, like any professional military, are constantly moving their air defense, even as you prepare the attack, the satellites are looking for changes, and then their updates are being sent again. Now, these updates are being sent along very sensitive communications channels capable of transmitting top secret, what they call special compartmented information, SCI material. When you have TSSCI, it's automatically no foreign. That means no foreigner. Ukraine can't touch it. So the Ukrainians they're not sitting there at a satellite downlink waiting for the printout to come out of the American targeting data. The Ukrainians are in another room. The Americans bring in the targeting data. Now, we have to load it into the various weapon systems. That's a technical capability that Ukrainians simply don't have. They're not trained to do. So we take the intelligence that we collected based upon a target that we selected, and then we give it to American hands who puts the guidance information into the weapon system. And then and only then does the Ukrainian hand come out and push the button. It's an attack by America against Russia. That's literally what's happening here. And the Russians have said that this could lead to nuclear war. But Vladimir Putin, again, I know in America we don't like to talk about this, but hey guys, thank him, because he's the only adult in the room. He's the man who said, I'm not going to continue climbing the escalation ladder. I'm looking for a way off. I'm going to add, at a minimum, add more rungs so that the climb is a little bit longer. We buy a little bit more time. We're not rushing to nuclear conflict. So he said, look, we understand what you guys are getting ready to do, and we understand who's responsible. But rather than us directly attacking you, you can play at this game. You want to attack us using your weapons through a proxy, Ukraine. We will find third parties around the world who will serve as our proxies, and we will give them long-range precision-guided weaponry that's capable of striking the United States and Europe, or both, if the conflict expands to their territory. So if the United States, for instance, sought to bomb Libya again, maybe this time the Libyans have been equipped with long-range missiles that can be fired and take out sites inside Ukraine, and maybe part of the inside Europe. I'm sorry, and maybe part of the deal that Russia is going to cut with these nations is a mutual security pact, so that these nations, if Russia is attacked or something happens, are going to be obligated to respond, and they will use these long-range precision-guided munitions to take out sites inside the United Kingdom, inside Europe, that otherwise would be incapable of being attacked. And so, what he did is he created this possibility. Then immediately everybody in the West panicked. My God, the Russians are doing this. Have they done it already? Where would these missiles go? And then Putin came out at the plenary session and said, we haven't done it yet. It's something we're considering. But, maybe if the West picks up the phone and calls me and tells me that they're not going to attack us or they're going to back down, maybe we won't do it. You see what he did there? He bought time. He created additional rungs up the escalation ladder. He is, tried to de-escalate this rush towards war. He's the only adult in the room, as I said earlier, and it's his policies that have given me vague hope that we can somehow navigate out of these troubled waters and into smooth sailing ahead. But it isn't because the Biden administration is avoiding conflict or Emmanuel Macron in France is avoiding it, because Vladimir Putin is avoiding conflict. Vladimir Putin is doing everything in his power to limit the potential of direct conflict. How long he can do this, only heaven knows. We do know that the West continues to view any effort by Russia to avoid confrontation as being a sign of weakness, that somehow Russia, is intimidated, they back down, etc. It's not the case. Russia's a very strong nation. Russia just doesn't want to commit suicide. They don't want a nuclear conflict. If you look at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, the final plenary session, Vladimir Putin didn't start off by talking about the dangers in the world that exist. He talked about BRICS, about economic issues, Russia's growing economy, Russia's trade with other neighbors, and how Russia will use BRICS to cement a coalition of nations that will provide the rest of the world an alternative to the G7 group of 7 nations headed by the United States that seek to impose their will on them. This is very much the year of Russia, but the year of Russia scares the hell out of the West, and so for the moment, the West is leaning aggressively forward, trying to intimidate Russia, to somehow convince the Russian people to rise up against Vladimir Putin, to convince Vladimir Putin that there's no chance that Russia can prevail. None of that resonates in Russia. Anybody who's been following Russia understands the importance of what happened in March when Putin won re-election. Overwhelming turnout, overwhelming percentage of those who turned out voting in favor. This is a mandate. Then listen to what he said on May 7th in his inauguration, and you see that Putin's taking Russia down a completely new path, one that has everything to do to restoring Russia to its to the status it should enjoy, given the size and strength of the nation. But this scares the United States. It's the last thing we want. So Lindsay is right when he reflects on this. But let's talk about what he says about Putin. I mean, apparently Lindsay knows Putin very well because he can speak on behalf of Putin and Xi Jinping. Lindsay's wrong. And is this me just saying this? He said, she said. Guess who the she is? Not me. Sorry, I didn't mean to go there. I just don't like Lindsey Graham. That was a very crude thing for me to say, so I apologize. But Lindsey Graham, I don't like him. He is implying that it was Putin's strategic objective to strip these materials, this material wealth away from Ukraine. We know that's a lie. Why do we know that's a lie? Well, there's this thing called the Istanbul Communique. Let's look at let's look at some of the mineral wealth that he talks about. One of them is lithium. Now, I'm not the world's smartest person, but I do know that lithium is a key component in the production of batteries, electric batteries, that play an important role in creating electric cars, etc. in the future. And that the nation that controls lithium production is going to have in the driver's seat when it comes to producing electric vehicles. And China, has sort of the corner on the market, and I think you'd be foolish to say, well, let's let China get control of everything. So I understand the intent there, but the Istanbul Communique was going to return. There's two places where these lithium fields exist in economically viable quantities. One is in Zaporizhia, one of the oblasts or territories of the new Russia that's been taken over by Russia. But Zaporizhia was going to be returned to the Ukrainians. Now, if the Russians wanted to keep those mineral resources, Lindsey Graham said, why is Russia giving Zaporizhia, with one of the largest exploitable lithium fields in the region, back to Ukraine? It shows that Lindsey Graham's a liar. The second place is Donetsk and the Donbass. Those fields are actually more viable because I guess it's easier to extract the lithium from these fields. But again, the way that the Istanbul Communique was structured is that Russia couldn't speak on behalf of an independent entity, and the Donbass, Donetsk, and Lugansk had declared their independence from Ukraine through referendums that took place on the eve of the Russian initiation of the special military operation. So Russia said, look, it's independent, but what we guarantee is that we will work with Ukraine and the international community to hold referenda on the future of the Donbass. Will it opt to return to Ukraine with its rights guaranteed? Will they opt to be independent or will they opt to join Russia? What Russia said is there's no foregone outcome here. We will, let the will of the people, in accordance with the United Nations Charter, play out. But Russia, that's not how you operate if your goal is to seize control of lithium fields and transfer this to China. So Lindsey Graham is just making stuff up. He's literally manufacturing a case out of thin air. The facts don't back up what he says. It's not Putin's intention to steal this material. It's just stupidity on Lindsey Graham's part. But then again, we're talking about Lindsey Graham, and pretty much everything he says and does is stupid. We have to. I don't like to be fair to the Israelis because I really don't think they deserve fairness in this in regard. But we just have to be responsible when we talk about this particular operation and not be hypocritical. It would be hypocritical of me to sit there and throw darts at the Israelis without acknowledging the fact that had America's hostage rescue operation in Iran gone forward, there was a real chance that we would have killed thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Iranians in the process. So that's that. Now let's get back to your question. Sorry, I had to get that off my conscience because I don't like to be hypocritical. I like to be balanced. Where does this leave Israel? Israel is in a very difficult situation right now, and the Israelis know it. There's panic in Israel as we speak. In order for Israel, the nation, to exist, it needs to be literally a land of plenty, a land of comfort, a land of economic success. And to have that, Israel has to live in peace and harmony with its neighbors and to be horizontally and vertically integrated with its neighbors from an economic standpoint. This was on October 6th. Everybody was talking about normalization of relations. Israel was negotiating normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia. Joe Biden had just gone to the G20 summit in India, where he bragged about what he called the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, which would connect India with Dubai and Dubai with Saudi Arabia by rail through Jordan, into Israel through Haifa, into Greece, so that India and Europe are now connected by this corridor. And this is such a big deal that Benjamin Netanyahu himself briefed this during the General Assembly debate in September. Instead of putting up his cartoon figure of the Iranian bomb, he put up a map that showed, Israel's role in this. And this is what Israel needed to survive as a nation state: peace and prosperity. Israel will never again enjoy peace, ever. They're not going to defeat Hamas. Gaza is a permanent wound. It's not going to be resolved in Israel's favor. Israel is talking about expanding the conflict into southern Lebanon against Hezbollah. Israel cannot win that conflict. I think one of the reasons why Israel hasn't yet launched that invasion is because they were reminded of that fact by Hezbollah, who successfully took out several Iron Dome sites in the vicinity, letting the Israelis know that they can take out all of the Iron Dome sites, and Israel will have no ability to protect itself from tens of thousands of rockets that'll land on Israel, fired from Hezbollah on a daily basis. And if you hit Israel with enough rockets over enough period of time, Israel doesn't exist. And the other thing is that Hezbollah isn't going to fight a fight that allows Israel to put 50,000 troops into southern Lebanon to push Hezbollah back to the Litani River. Hezbollah has gone underground, just like Hamas did in Gaza. And while Israel is digging and fighting Hezbollah there, Hezbollah will appear in the rear of Israel and take Galilee, take the northern. Hezbollah ensured that the next fight between Israel and Hezbollah isn't going to be fought amongst southern Lebanese villages, but amongst the villages and towns of northern Israel. And Hezbollah will win this fight. Israel now knows this. The Houthi have shown that, Israel's sea lines of communications are vulnerable and have been successfully interdicted. And Israel has suffered billions of dollars of economic loss as a result. And then this continued attacks from Gaza, from Yemen, from Hezbollah, from Iraq now. The pro-Iranian Shia militias are now firing drones and cruise missiles that are striking Haifa, the city of Haifa. The bottom line is Israel will never know peace as long as it continues this current stance. The India-Middle East Economic Corridor is finished. It is not going to be revived. The concept of normalization of relations between Israel and its neighbors is ridiculous. Israel has lost it lost the support it enjoyed amongst other nations around the world. In fact, the only nation that unabashedly supports Israel is the United States. Everybody else is turning their back on Israel. Israel has lost the world, which means that if this is not rectified, and it won't be rectified, that millions of Israelis are going to start asking themselves the question, can we continue to live in Israel? Is it the quality of life that we were expecting? Is this a healthy enough economy? Do I want to subject my family to the economic pressures and the psychological pressures of living in a besieged Israeli state? And the answer is no. Millions of Israelis have dual citizenship. They hold second passports. And we've already seen hundreds of thousands of them flee Israel. And if this situation deteriorates, you'll see millions more. And as Israel depopulates, it becomes less and less viable as a nation state, especially in terms of the singular state. Israel's in big trouble. The only thing that's holding Israel up right now is the support of the United States. The United States just passed a resolution now that's been voted in favor of by the Security Council. If Israel disregards this, they're going to lose the United States. The United States will have no choice but to move forward and impose some sort of restrictions on Israel. And we can make the following observation. Throughout the modern history of Israel, especially since the Six-Day War in 1967, no Israeli prime minister has been able to remain in power without the support of the United States. And no American president has been able to be elected without the support of the state of Israel. We have a situation now where Joe Biden is probably going to be compelled to decisively act against the state of Israel. And this is going to create tremendous political problems for him here in the United States. And we have a problem for Benjamin Netanyahu that he is going to have to act in a manner which alienates him from the United States at a time when his government is in collapse. And there may be the necessity for re-election, and this is going to damage him politically. So this is a big deal, this resolution. It puts both the United States and Israel, both Biden and Bibi, in a lot of hot water, which only then comes back to the point I was making. None of this promotes stability and peace. All of this promotes continued chaos and anarchy. And this will be disruptive to the region, disruptive to Israel, and probably prompt even more Israelis to flee. I don't see Israel lasting the decade. I don't see Israel as it currently exists surviving another 10 years. It can't. Its economy will collapse. And it's the political isolation will be real. And as you move forward with a two-state solution, that only works if both states are viable. But as Israel depopulates, and remember, if Israel is compelled to move towards a two-state solution, there's going to be big problems. There's going to be a lot of Israelis that say, we don't want to live in a two-state solution. They'll leave. The other thing is you have a whole bunch of West Bank settlers in there who have stolen land that they're going to have to be evicted. That is another guaranteed outcome from this. The settlers cannot be allowed to remain in any construct that is Palestinian land. If the Israelis move against those West Bank settlers, there's going to be a crisis of confidence inside Israel again. those settlers aren't going to say, okay, we're just going to stay in Israel. These are Brooklyn Jews who fled the United States knowing they were going to steal land and stay there. These are people who don't believe in hard work. They don't believe in earning anything. They're thieves. They're thugs. They're murderers. They're bandits. And when they lose their settlements, they're going to go back to where they came from, the United States or Australia or Canada or Europe. They're not staying. Israel is going to depopulate and lose its most fervent, Zionistic elements, which means that the Israelis that stay behind are going to be those Israelis who are conditioned to the understanding that Israel has to live peacefully with their Palestinian neighbors, which means that the Zionist entity, this Zionist experiment, is finished, and that whatever emerges from this isn't going to be called the State of Israel. It's going to be called the State of Palestine. And hopefully it will incorporate a significant Jewish population, of course, a significant Muslim population, a significant Christian population, Druze population. The current population of Palestine is going to have to come together and learn to live together. I had an interesting question from somebody the other day who talked about maybe the Irish could provide some sort of guidance based upon the Northern Ireland, compromises that have been made in terms of governance between Catholics and Protestants. And I thought that was a genius idea. I'll just postulate this for your audience. So let's say I'm returned, and I've taken a couple of bad blows, I'm bloodied, but I'm trying to slow down the battlefield to receive weapons. And then I'm going to use those weapons to alter the outcome on the battlefield. When I gather these weapons, is it better that I use them the way that I want to use them based upon a plan that I've come up to achieve the results? Or as the weapons come in, do I immediately send them to battlefields on the front line that are picked by Russia, that Russia's determined this is where the fight's going to be? And therefore, I lose control of these assets. They're taken out of my hands as they come in. They're gone. They're on the battlefield. Oh, I've lost control. Russia's controlling the battlefield. That's what's happening here. Russia is creating the circumstances in which it dictates how Ukraine is going to use these weapons that Bloomberg talks about. Ukraine's not going to be able to assemble them into some sort of strategic reserve. Right, Ukraine is going to have to immediately send them to the battlefield based upon what Russia is doing. And what is Russia doing? Russia, again, Vladimir Putin talked about this. That's why I always encourage people to attend the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And if you can't, to at least monitor it and listen to what the Russian president has to say. But he said some interesting things, including that Russia could win this war very soon, but it would require massive offensive operations that would kill a lot of Russian soldiers. He said, we're not in the business of killing a lot of Russian soldiers. We don't, that's not what we want to do. It's also interesting, just as a little tangent, that Putin hinted for the first time about the level of Russia's casualties. And he speaks of what are known as irretrievable losses. These are dead and wounded to the point that you can't be returned to the battlefield. If you threw out a number, say 500,000 irretrievable Ukrainian losses, some people, myself included, would say there's more than that. Others would say there's less. Let's just call that a happy middle ground, 500,000. Russia said that it's 1 to 5, that for every 5 Ukrainian irretrievable losses, there's 1 Russian irretrievable loss. That means 100,000 Russians have become irretrievable losses. This in a war that's just slightly over 2 years in length. The United States lost 58,000 men in Vietnam over the course of 10 years, and that broke our nation, broke our back. We lost the will to continue the fight. But the Russians are getting stronger. If it took 2 years to have 100,000 irretrievable losses, understand that Russia is gaining recruits at a rate of 50,000 a month in some cases. 30 to 50,000 a month are joining to be trained to come and fight in the special military operation. So even if the Russian losses are high, and 100,000 is very high, the Russia's making up for it. Russia continue fighting. What Putin is saying is we don't want to. The modern war is bloody enough as it is. We don't want to do things on the battlefield that cause Russians to die. We prefer to cause the enemy to die. And again, 500,000 is a lot of dead or irretrievably lost Ukrainians. So Russia's goal has been to advance where you can, but where the Ukrainians decide they want to fight, then to push, stop, dig in, and then initiate the meat grinder operation. Bring in the fab bombs, the guided bombs with the wings that fly in and hit targets. The aircraft never have to reach the forward edge of the battlefield. Artillery supremacy, missile supremacy, drone supremacy, and basically grind the Ukrainians down, so that you've now created what we've seen in the past, the Bakhmut effect, where the Ukrainians commit to a battle, and then in order to prevail in the battle, just keep pouring resources in until 90,000 troops later, they're out of resources. Or we can talk about the Avdiivka effect, another battle where the Ukrainians just kept pouring in resources until they ran out of resources. In both battles, Bakhmut and Avdiivka, once the Ukrainians ran out of resources, they had to retreat, and Russia advanced and took that territory and then continues to advance slowly. What's happening in Kharkov? Russia opened up a northern front. The purpose of this front ostensibly is to create a buffer zone. But the Russians advanced as far as they could without committing the offensive and losing people. They advanced as far as they could, and now the Ukrainians have rushed reinforcements in, and they've frozen the lines. But that's to Russia's advantage, because now Russia is involved in meat grinder operations. And now we have a meat grinder taking place there. We have another meat grinder taking place in Donetsk. We have another meat grinder taking place in Zaporizhia. And as these weapons come flowing in with whatever limited manpower Ukraine is able to mobilize, the meat grinder is consuming them based upon Russia's initiative, not Ukraine's. And guess what? And now the Russians have opened up another front near Sumy. Now another meat grinder. There's talk about Russia opening up a front in Kherson. You have the Ukrainians actually evacuating Kherson now because they can't defend it. They don't have troops. And so, Russia could be going back there. The bottom line is Russia's going to build meat grinder operations all along the front. So Ukraine throws in its resources, grinds them up, and then when they're out of resources, Russia does what it does. It keeps advancing. This is inexorable. It can't be stopped. It's proof positive that, Russia is winning. And even with all this new NATO equipment and stuff, it's not enough. Basic military math shows that Russia is accumulating military power every day that this war goes on. They're gaining more strength than is being lost on the battlefield by a significant number. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are losing more strength on the battlefield than is being replenished, even with this NATO assistance. So no matter what, the disparity between the two forces is the gap is just growing even larger in favor of Russia. So that's what's going on. I'll leave you with this thing. Putin has always been saying that the calendar doesn't drive this operation. That, we're not talking about victory by this month or by this month or by this month. Victory happens when victory happens. Victory is defined by denazification, getting rid of all of the Banderist supporters in the Ukrainian government, to include the Zelensky government and anybody affiliated with him. The Russians have sought to isolate Zelensky politically, both at home and abroad, by questioning the constitutionality of his mandate. But it's so they're attacking Zelensky domestically, but they're also attacking Zelensky abroad, basically saying that this is a man who doesn't represent the Ukrainian people, that this is a dictatorship, etc. And the implication that Putin gave is that he expects Zelensky to stay in power through this year into next year, and that next year he believes that this problem will go away. But if you've built denazification around removing Zelensky and his government, and you're saying it's going to take another year, I think Putin just told us something there, that he's in no rush to win this war. I know I've quoted Russian generals who've told me, no, the battlefield's changing in May, it's going to be decisive, and then you're going to see even bigger map changes. But I think that they may have made those statements assuming that they were going to do big arrow operations. And the Russian government has said, we don't have a mandate. We have a mandate to win. We don't have a mandate to win at any cost. And we're not going to do these big arrow operations, which now only 23% of the Ukrainian energy infrastructure is up and running. And even if the war stopped today, they wouldn't be able to get that infrastructure up and running by wintertime. One can definitely understand that what's left of the summer season, that Russia is going to try and reduce that 23% to as close to zero as possible, so that Ukraine is facing a disaster when wintertime comes. And if it's a harsh winter, Ukraine may not survive as a nation. And that's part of Russia's strategy. Remember, Putin said, I'm not in the business of killing Russian soldiers. We need to preserve as many Russian lives as possible. So we're going to do things that puts maximum pressure on Ukraine to willingly go to a table and say, yes, we're ready to surrender. So that's my take on the battlefield. It's a bloody meat grinder operation where Russia is in control. But Russia is not committed to any timeline. Russia is committed to accomplishment of objectives. And again, the fact that the United States and Europe are pouring money into Ukraine, it changes the game. It's a game changer. It doesn't mean Russia loses. Russia's not going to lose this war, but the game has changed. New realities have come into play that Russia has to adapt to. And so I think Russia's strategy is a strategy of patience and perseverance. Just wait and let the situation develop in a way that's to the exclusive benefit of Russia. And in this case, that means that the Russians are killing far more Ukrainians than can be replaced. And the Russians are ensuring that whatever replacements they bring in exceeds the number of Russians that the Ukrainians are killing. No, that's unacceptable. And it's not just, here's the interesting thing, it's not just me saying this or the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court. In 2004, the Israeli Supreme Court talked about proportionality, saying that Israel doesn't have a right to go in and carry out operations that will result in, significant civilian life, and ignore the proportionality question. And so we have a massive war crime that took place. There's no defending this whatsoever. There's not a court of jurisdiction that took up this case wouldn't find against Israel here, because literally there's no aspect of this that meets the proportionality aspect of it. But there's also what this did to America and the reputation of the United States. I don't think there's a person out here who follows this, who looked at what America was doing with this pier off the coast of Gaza and said, that's a brilliant idea. Why didn't I drink the V8 and get this one, man? If I had just drinking a V8, I could have come up with this idea, and it's genius. I mean, let's spend $340 some odd million and build a pier where we could get humanitarian stuff to come off, and it goes to the Palestinian people. But, oh, wait, it doesn't really, does it? Because there's not too much to come off. The pier is very fragile. Windstorm comes up, pier gets washed away. All knowable events. Guys, go study the Battle of Normandy. We just had the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Normandy. And study the concept of mulberry harbors and what that means, protecting artificial man-made piers or jetties from weather. Right after D-Day, the weather came in and swept away, blew up the mulberry harbors, and screwed up the whole offloading that was supposed to take place We know that it's almost impossible to do that. I'll give away something about my background too. In the lead up to the Gulf War, I was on a planning cell working directly for the Commandant of the Marine Corps to plan combat options, amphibious warfare options for the Marine Corps, because General Schwarzkopf at that time had 2 Marine divisions assigned, and his whole thing was put the Marines right up against the strongest Iraqi defenses and charge straight into the lines. Now, Marines aren't cowards. We've done this before. We could do it. But, we sat there and went, we really don't want to build another Iwo Jima memorial about the Iraq War. There's got to be a better way to use Marines, where instead of putting us on the ground like 2 Army divisions, we're an amphibious force. And so one of my concepts, actually it was a concept that I came up with, was to take a core-sized element and insert it on the Al-Faw Peninsula and then advance rapidly into the Iraqi rear, cutting off the Al-Zair logistics base from Baghdad. Reality that what Lindsey Graham says is reflective of an overarching policy posture by the United States when it comes to Russia. Go back to the early 1990s, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Russia that emerged from that. It's one of the ugliest periods of Russian history, and I would say it's one of the uglier periods of American history too, and indeed the history of the collective West, because rather than extending a helping hand to Russia, we put our foot on Russia's throat. And we helped install a very weak, corrupt leader named Boris Yeltsin, whom we exploited. In fact, all this talk about about Russian interference in American elections that turned out to be false. In 1996, America got Boris Yeltsin reelected, and it was such an egregious affront that Time magazine even made it a cover, had best election money can buy. So we stole an election in Russia, gave it to Boris Yeltsin for the purpose of keeping Russia politically weak, and to steal mineral resources from Russia, from the former Soviet Union. But there was an overarching objective of breaking Russia up into its constituent parts. This is what the Chechen conflict was all about. It was a CIA-backed operation designed to promote succession movements, to get the Muslims of the Russian Federation to rise up against. It wasn't just designed in Chechnya that to the Kuwaiti forces, putting them in the horns of a dilemma, where if they left their trenches, they'd get bombed. If they stayed in place, they'd starve to death. Classic amphibious operation kind of stuff. And the problem we had was there's no port facility. There's Qasar, but that easily mined said, how do you get Marines over the beach fast enough, ready to fight? I came up with the idea that we're going to build. It's actually a pretty clever idea. I'm pretty proud of it. We're going to build a pier, but the way we're going to build the pier is you take what's called a roll-on, roll-off ship. And you take the first roll-on, roll-off ship. On that ship, you have a Marine rifle company already lined up in its combat march order. And that ship comes in and runs aground on the beach. Seabees come out and improve that front, and then the companies ride off. Now, roll-on, roll-off allows vehicles to enter the back and roll out the front. And then behind it comes another roll-on, roll-off that comes in and links up with this one. And that company leaves its ship, goes on the other ship in. We're building a pier, and we just keep lining them up all the way across. There it is. And we have 3 of these things because you need, things. And this came up in the mind of a stupid captain. And it passed muster. Everybody said it was genius. We're going to do it. But one of the things we were concerned about was weather. What happened? We got these ships all linked up like some giant centipede. And what happens if the weather comes in and just blows the crap away? And I didn't have the answer for that. My answer was, we need to basically get a division on shore and have a regiment peel off and secure Qasr. And then we would use the Qasr port facilities. And that was the plan, because we didn't have time to build a Mulberry Harbor to protect it. If bad weather had come in, it could have caused problems. But what I'm trying to point out is that people who do this for a living plan these things. We know what the history of military operations are. And anybody sitting there trying to put a pier off of Gaza has to know about weather, has to know about tidal surges, has to know about every aspect of it. That's why we have, intelligence officers who are supposed to have tasked the divers to go in and put in sensors and check the water flow and check everything out and make sure that all the calculations are done so the pier is done. It's the dumbest idea in the world to put this pier in, which now you have to ask the question, well, why did they put the pier in? Because the pier is ideally located to gather intelligence against Hamas, to provide an observation platform into, I think we need to be honest about what happened. It was a military operation designed to free Israeli citizens who were being held against their will by Hamas. We can call those people hostages if you want to use that term, prisoners of war if they were military, if they were civilian, hostages. And on the face of it, of course Israel has a right to do that. I know there's the argument, it's an illegal occupier. I use that argument all the time. You can't argue, you can't complain when the enemy, when people resist you and all that kind of stuff. I agree. But if Hamas, the whole purpose of Hamas taking the hostages was to bring them into Gaza and compel Israel to carry out military operations designed to free the hostages. That's what this whole thing is about. And so Israel, this is a problem for Israel. And this is what we need to focus on, is the political problem of the hostages. It's been one of the issues that have been hounding the Netanyahu administration. Indeed, as we speak, his government is collapsing around him. Benny Gantz, the Minister of Defense, one of his key political opponents, has left the war cabinet. He's no longer part of the government. He's been followed by at least 3 others. And this may lead to, Israel being compelled to carry out elections in a time of war. Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure to resign because he's not defeating Hamas. He's not defeating Hezbollah. He's not ending this confrontation. Iran got the better of him, and yet he knows that if he doesn't do something, he's going to have to. It's inevitable that he'd be pushed out. So this operation was designed to buy him time. It was a successful hostage rescue operation. That's how it's being spun. That he, Benjamin Netanyahu, is the brave Israeli leader that will never give up on hostages. This is a tremendous propaganda victory for Israel in Israel. It's something that the Israelis desperately need as a nation. You look at the videotapes of the lifeguards announcing the rescue over the radio to all the people on the beach in Tel Aviv and how they're cheering and clapping. This is a big deal. This is a much needed boost in the arm from Benjamin Netanyahu, which tells you everything you need to know about why he did it. Because let me tell you this. This is the worst hostage rescue operation in the history of hostage rescue operations. First of all, there was no military necessity for this operation. It's clear that the 4 hostages who were released were being well fed. They weren't being tortured. They weren't being raped. They weren't they're being held against their will, and I'm not legitimizing this whatsoever. No matter how much I support the Hamas cause, I understand the reality that if you seize citizens of another nation, don't be surprised when that other nation comes in looking for those citizens through use of force. So, Israel had every right to do what it's doing, but not how it did it. You see, these hostages could have been released through negotiation, the acceptance of a ceasefire. In fact, there's a Security Council just voted in support of the American proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza, one which has a hostage release component built into it. So all Israel had to do, there was no military necessity. These hostages weren't being executed. The only hostages that have died in Hamas are hostages who died because Israel fired missiles through. One of the surviving hostages talked about that, how she knows that Israeli missiles killed Israeli hostages. The only hostages that died at the hands of the Israeli Defense Force. All of these hostages could have been released simply by Israel agreeing to a ceasefire on terms that bring about an end to the conflict. Israel wouldn't do this. So you can't speak of military necessity. There was political necessity, and that's never a justification. Just because Benjamin Netanyahu needs a shot in the arm doesn't ever justify this. What made this assault a crime? Under international humanitarian law, under the laws of war, under the Geneva Conventions, proportionality is a factor that has to be brought into play when talking about carrying out strikes that could result in civilian casualties. The law of war doesn't say that you can't kill civilians. What it says is that the losses of civilians must be in proportion to the military gain achieved by the operation. And since I already told you there was no military imperative here, no military gain, that means that no civilians could be killed. There's no reason to kill any, let alone over 200, plus. I mean, I don't know what the exact number is now. It's over 240, I think, dead areas of Gaza, where you can do visual observation and you can do technical surveillance of this, and it's done by the United States in coordination with Israeli intelligence. It's also a perfect staging ground. We talk about getting humanitarian goods in there, but it allows vehicles to be staged that operate under the cover of humanitarian operations. We know that the Israelis used humanitarian vehicles to deploy their troops. One of the trucks was designed to mimic the transfer of displaced persons, that move around. And there's no doubt in my mind that the Israelis probably rehearsed this, meaning they sent, fake runs through the area just to get the locals used to seeing this kind of vehicle moving. But this came off of the pier. So the Israeli forces deployed to the pier disguised as American forces, and then they fell in on these vehicles, and they deployed. And the United States had to have been involved in the command and control of the logistics, the planning of this. So the United States was involved in this operation that turned into a war crime because they slaughtered over 220 civilians to rescue 4 hostages. They killed at least 3 other hostages. If this had been an American operation, I can guarantee you that there would be a congressional inquiry and there would be court-martials of the officers in charge. This was not a military success, not at all. They killed 3 hostages, one of whom is an American. I don't know why the United States Congress isn't outraged. The one question I would ask is, how did this come to be? Did we know the Israelis were going in after an American citizen? What measures did we do to protect this American? Why did we allow the Israelis to carry out a military operation to rescue an American citizen when, if they simply did this ceasefire, this person could have been freed without any harm? And then the final one is, why did we allow the Israelis to commit war crimes? And here's the interesting part. Nobody's talking about this. There's something called the Leahy Law, named after the former senator, I believe, from the state of Vermont. I could be wrong on that one, Patrick Leahy. The Leahy Law prevents America from providing money to military units of a nation that we're providing support to, who have committed what are known as gross violation of human rights. Well, what happened in this hostage rescue is a gross violation of human rights. So all of the elite Israeli special forces units, Yaman, Sayed Matkal, there's a number of others that were involved in this. All of those now, by law, by American law, have to be reviewed. Because if they committed gross violation of of human rights, which they did by disregarding the notion of proportionality, then we can't give them money. We can't work with them. We have to ostracize them. Is this happening? The answer is no. See, America ignores its laws, and now we come to the final outcome of this. This has destroyed the reputation of the United States as an impartial arbiter. We can never again be trusted. We can only be seen as unilaterally supporting Israel across the board. When we create an object, a pier that we say is for humanitarian purposes, and then we use it for military purposes, who can trust us again? This was a one-time operation. They're not going to be able to launch another operation like this using this pier. This was a one of, which means you have to question them, what about this was so important? Was it really so important to get 4 hostages rescued when over 120 remain in captivity? And the answer is yes, from a political standpoint. This was an act of political desperation by Benjamin Netanyahu. He was so desperate that he basically burned the pier. The pier can't be used like this anymore, and it really can't be used as an intelligence gathering thing, because your visual observations now have to operate under the assumption that Hamas knows they're being watched. Therefore, what you're seeing is probably deception. And the signals, likewise, false signals are going to be coming, complicating your analysis. We compromised the whole thing for the worst hostage rescue mission in modern. And I don't like to leave any useful analogy unreferenced. You said that the Israelis got caught going in, and that led to this broader battlefield. That does somewhat alter the proportionality debate. It's still disproportional use of force, but it's not as though the Israelis said that this is automatically going to happen when the raid takes place. What happened is, as you said, the initial assault force came in, was detected by Al-Qassam. In fact, there's a lot of reason to believe that these hostages weren't held by Hamas at all. These were held by the PFLP. And so, somebody caught them. The major firefight took place, which required then the Israelis to launch strikes to suppress the fire, and the civilians got in the way. And I can just hear people say, my God, those Israelis are so cruel and inhumane and Are people familiar with Desert One, Operation Eagle Claw? It was an American aborted plan to rescue 50 some odd American hostages held by Iran at the U.S. embassy in Tehran. There was also a smaller element of Americans held at the foreign ministry annex. Delta Force, together with a team from Special Forces Detachment in Berlin, were going to launch an assault to free the hostages. But do people understand that the assault was going to be supported by an AC-130 gunship flying circles over Tehran? AC-130 gunship has 105 millimeter cannon, 40 millimeter cannons, 20 millimeter cannons. And if the mission had been compromised, because the idea is that they would seize the hostages, take them to a soccer stadium, and then helicopters would fly them out to an airfield that had been seized by U.S. Army Rangers, and C-141 transports would fly in, load the